Features of metaphysical poets. It used everyday speech, unusual logic, and images were exaggerated. It was a mix of wit and seriousness. Irony and paradox were used in combination, and it made difficult for readers to decide if poetry was serious or casual. Metaphysical word was coined by John Dryden. Now, what was John Donne's way of writing poetry? Now, let's look at that in points. It was a colloquial in a language. It was related to the unrelated things together to express. They were mixed. Unrelated things were mixed together to express ideas and emotions. Donne's chief concern was his faith, the psychology of love and sentiment. Images from zoology, astronomy, seasons were used to convey emotions of the lovers. So now, how emotional aspect was mixed with the geography and the science. All these things were used in mixture, and it was delivered to the readers to read, and it became a little difficult for the readers to understand the amalgamation of the emotional, the scientific, and the geographical aspect of the poetry. Now, the features of the Jacobean drama. They used everyday language. Money, property, class were the main themes. New frankness about sexuality, secret fascination with the wicked and corrupt was the theme of the writings of the Jacobean drama. Moral and sexual consumption was prevalent during that time. Now, lust, adultery, corruption, death, sickness, both physical sickness and mental sickness, cruelty of aristocrats and upper class, hypocrisy and family crisis were the main themes of the writings. Most Jacobean dramatists wrote under the influence of Christopher Marlowe and Shakespeare. Thomas Heywood Dekker, John Webster, these were among those very famous names of the Jacobean drama. John Webster plus John Dekker, they wrote Westward Ho and Westward and Northward Ho. So it was a very, very famous work written by both of them in a team. Duchess of Malfi plus The White Devil, both these works written by John Webster, these depicted corrupt Italian society. Now, another famous name during the Jacobean era was George Chapman. He was the first major translator of Homer in English. Ben Jonson was a significant satirist of Jacobean period. Walpole, another name. Ben Jonson, he wrote this work, Walpole, which was called The Fox, The Alchemist, Bartholomew Falch. Now, another important name during the Jacobean era was John Marston. He wrote Poetaster. Another name was John Marston. He wrote Antonio and Mellida, which was full of ghosts and dead bodies. Thomas Middleton and Thomas Dekker, they wrote A Trick to Catch the Old One. Thomas Middleton wrote about he wrote a famous work which was called Women Beware Women. Another work was about the name was The Changeling. Now, Mask was another kind of work which was written during the Jacobean era. Now, what was Mask? It came into prominence during the reign of James I. It used expensive costumes, special effects, served moral purpose. Victory of good over evil was shown in Mask. Now, who were the important writers of this kind of work? These were George Chapman, Francis Beaumont, Thomas Campion, James Shirley, and Ben Jonson. Now, Milton wrote a very famous work, Comus, which was written in 1637. It was a masque which celebrated women's faith and virtue. It shows how women's virtue is guided by gods because she is a woman of great faith. Now, Francis Beaumont, he was a wittiest playwright of the Jacobean era. He wrote The Women Hater. The Women Hater, in this work, we had Gondarino, who is a women hater, and we have Glutton Lenzarillo. These were the main characters of Francis Beaumont's work, The Women Hater. Now, Francis Beaumont and John Fletcher, he wrote The Maid's Tragedy. Now we come to the Caroline age. We begin from the Renaissance age. After Renaissance age, we saw how the Jacobean era started. After Jacobean era, we come to the Caroline age, which spanned from 1625 to 1649. Now, this age was named after Charles I and is known for the political tension between Charles I and the Puritans. So there was a lot of political tension which happened between King Charles I and the Puritans. Now here came a non-fiction prose. The non-fiction prose was highly personal. It had a degree of skepticism about religious and philosophical truths. There was a mix of science, philosophy, and religion. There was a debate between reason and faith. It marks early moment of European enlightenment and thought, because here we saw just like in the metaphysical poetry, in the metaphysical work, we had the entry of science and geography. Here in the Caroline era, in the prose of the Caroline age, we see how reason, how scientific inquiry, how scientific thought came into being. It was influenced, the prose non-fiction writing was influenced by the discoveries made about the cultures and worlds through travels in Asia and Africa. Now, a very famous work of the Caroline era was written by Thomas Browne. His work was Religio Medici, which was called a doctor's religion, which was published in 1642. He also wrote Pseudodoxia Epidemica, Hydrotaphia, which was also called Urn Burial. Now, what were the features of the Caroline's religious poetry? Caroline religious poetry. In the Caroline religious poetry, we saw the tension between worldly human desires and will of God, needs of body and spiritual duties. It was a very personal form of writing which had faith and religion into its work. Now, George Herbert, he wrote The Caller. The main theme around which George Herbert wrote, it was a tension between the worldly desires and need to surrender oneself to God. Another most famous writer of the Caroline era was Richard Crashaw. He exhibits significant interest in human body and its function. We had Henry Vaughan. He prefers to deal with the world of innocence. Another writer of Caroline era was Thomas Traherne. Now, features of the Cavalier poetry. The main personalities who are named in the Cavalier poetry were Thomas Carew, John Suckling, John Cleveland, and Richard Lovelace. Caroline drama comes to an end as in 1642 public playhouses were closed by the end of Parliament. Now here comes the interregnum period, which spanned from 1649 to 59. The interregnum period was a period between civil war and the restoration of monarchy with Charles II. So, in this period, we see how the theaters were closed, how plays were closed. So, it was a period of tension. It was a transition between the Caroline and the Restoration period. Now, the writers of the interregnum period were the Milton, Isaac Walton, Richard Baxter. One of the most important prose writers of the time was Thomas Hobbes. He was influenced by the mechanistic philosophy of Descartes. Now, Descartes, he considered humans as machines. Now, Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan, which is a very important work. Now, poetry of interregnum period. The poetry was written. The main personalities who wrote poetry during the interregnum period were the Abraham Cowley, Andrew Marvell. Abraham Cowley, he wrote The Mistress in 1647. Andrew Marvell, he wrote To His Coy Mistress. Now, this seize the day. This phrase was used most commonly during the interregnum period, and it was used by Andrew Marvell in his work. Now, what did it mean? It meant the phrase carpe diem was used, which meant seize the day. It is central to the theme of the poems of Andrew Marvell, Herrick, and Waller, just as it was for Spenser. Spenser used this carpe diem phrase in his work, The Faerie Queene. Now, let's come back again to John Milton. He wrote Paradise Lost in his work. It was a very, very famous work. It was an epic. Then he wrote On the Morning of Christ's Nativity in 1629. Paradise Lost, his first edition, appeared in 1667. It talked about the Christian theology, pagan mythology, and the recent scientific theories in classical literature. Paradise Regained was written in 1671. It came after Paradise Lost, which was published in 1667. Paradise Regained came in 1671. Then, in the same year, we have Samson Agnostus, which came along with Paradise Regained. A very famous line of Paradise Regained was, "And calm of mind, all passion spent." That's it for this lecture. Thank you.